Hi, Alan Stratton from Woodturns. For this project, let's turn a box in the form of a pumpkin. The tricky part of this is to turn a sphere and a lid so that the grooves are all integrated into it. The wood for this one is honey locust, which I thought would be a good color for a pumpkin. However, in retrospect, that's a little bit tough because it's a very hard wood and it tended to chip a lot around the edge of the lip. But still, in the end, I think I saved it into a nice pumpkin box.
I found this block of honey locust and thought it would be a good color wood for a Thanksgiving pumpkin. I'll spare you the rough rounding and go directly to marking outlines for the octagon method for spheres. I'll have to modify the standard process, but it will still guide me to a sphere for my pumpkin. I trim back one end for a starting point. I'll mark the octagon corners from this good end. I'll also mark the side length for the good end. Then start cutting the 45-degree side on the live center end. One difference is to cut a shallow tenon on this end. After swapping ends and remounting the wood to a chuck, I continue. First, cut a tenon since I need this wood for a lid, then part off the excess wood. I can cut it long because the lid needs to cover at least half of the 45-degree side. More on that later. Then continue by cutting a 45-degree line on this end, like the other end. The difference is that I do not have the guidance of the end of the octagon, since this is slightly shorter than standard octagon. Then trim the end straight. Since this is intended to be a box, I start that process by drilling a 3/8" hole to depth, but leaving enough at the bottom to accommodate a dowel hole later. This honey locust is very hard wood. My usual hollowing had difficulties. I switched to drilling with a Forstner bit. This worked better. Then I rounded out with the interior with other hollowing tools. But it was a tough go with this hard wood and small tenon. I also cut a 45-degree chamfer inside the opening. Now the excess wood is mounted again in the chuck. I start by fitting a tenon to the opening of the box. Then the tough part, to also fit the chamfer inside. That is the tough part. Now I relieve the inside of the lid a little with the drill, but that is a prelude to drilling a 3/8" hole through the lid portion. Then part off the lid. Next, glue a dowel into the base and the lid. Just make sure it is a good bond. It will be critical later. Now the box with the lid is mounted to the chuck so that I can continue rounding it into a sphere. One different key is to shorten it to be equal to the diameter. Then continue with the octagon method by dividing sides and then rounding by eye. That old tenon is quickly cut out in the rounding process. It is a bit difficult to round off the other side of the sphere since it does not have nubs like the usual process. Pressing against the chuck works great. Time to switch to the cup faceplate to refine the sphere using at least 3 axes rotations. Shear cutting is gentle enough to take off the high spots. Push cuts would be excessive pressure. Scraping is also a good option. A little sanding with 80 grit sandpaper was the final sphere shaping. I need some regular divisions. For this, I put my threaded cup faceplate into a chuck. Then use the indexing on the chuck to mark 12 divisions along the grain. Next, I have rotated the axis to have a set of the division marks at the equator. I'm careful to align the opposite marks and the dowel in the lid portion. Then start to cut a shallow cove with a spindle gouge. This is tough cutting on this hard, brittle wood. The edge of the lid chips out. Disappointing. Then sand this cove through the grits and apply shellac. Now adjust the wood to another division mark, again aligning the set of marks and the dowel and the lid. Cut another shallow cove, hoping to smooth out the cutting of this very hard wood. I switched to a round nose scraper. It is still tough going. To top it all, the lid parts company. My glue did not hold. Probably the wood glue did not grab well despite the overnight cure. I continue with the scraper to equal the depth to the same as the first cove. Then sand this cove through the grits and apply shellac, and continue the same process of adjusting to a new division mark until all have been completed. Now mount the sphere into a donut chuck. This mount is so that I can drill out the dowel holding the lid to the base of the pumpkin box. Time to swap the box around to use the opening as a mortise for an expansion mount. I want here to drill out the base. I would have liked to cut this mortise with tools, but this wood has been so problematic that I decided to drill a shallow recess. The long point of the Forstner bit poked through into the interior. I filled that point hole with UV resin, then risked tooling the base with a round nose scraper. I also filled the interior dowel hole with another piece of dowel. To top off the pumpkin, I turned and carved a stem from sapele. Honey locust was a poor selection for my pumpkin. It was very hard and chipped at the lid. I had to ease the chips much more than my previous cherry version. With a different wood selection, it would have been more fun and rewarding multi-axis pumpkin box. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my website as well as on YouTube. When you subscribe to my website, I email when there's a new video. This is a more reliable process than YouTube's wandering recommendations. Please tell your friends about my weekly videos. I appreciate your comments and questions. Please wear your full face shield whenever the lathe is running. Yes, I nag, and it's worth it if I can save one of you some pain.